All right, today, guys, we have part 3 of our Earth system slideshow, and we're going to be looking at weathering and erosion. Specifically, the question we're going to be able to answer today is, how does Earth's surface change? Well, the first way it changes is through weathering. And we had this as a vocabulary word, but we're going to explore this concept a little further. So weathering, and this is something you write down and you'll need to know, is the breaking down of rocks on Earth's surface into smaller pieces. So if you picture a mountain slowly breaking down, there's rocks sliding down it, and those rocks, as they tumble, break into smaller rocks, and that could be an example of it. But there's many different ways weather can affect the Earth's surface. So here we see some statues, and over here we have this is an old statue. This is what it looked like when it was newer. So just being out in weather, rain, sunshine, hot, cold, it starts to deteriorate. The same thing here. This, I don't know how many years are in between this, but what was once a face, you can't even tell it's a face anymore. And that's the result of weather on these objects, on these statues. So what causes weathering? Well, gravity. You can see that this rock here fell from this cliff, and that's a result of gravity. It was probably slowly over time, rain washed away some of the support there, and gravity pulled it down. Running water. As water flows or rains down or goes through a river, it carries sediments along with it, and it causes things to erode away. Sand does this. You blow sand blows on an object, it'll take the paint off cars, it'll take the paint off buildings, it can pit those statues that we saw earlier. So sand blowing can cause a lot of damage. Ice. A lot of the problems we have with roads, as you're driving down the road and you hit a pothole, that's usually from ice. In the winter, rainfall or snow falls, it melts, the water gets in cracks in the road, it freezes, so that means it expands the crack, and then it contracts when it melts, and it happens over and over again until it creates a pothole. Plants can also cause weathering. Plants grow on buildings. You see it all the time, and as their roots dig down in the building, it breaks the buildings apart. It does this to rocks and sidewalks and all sorts of things. The other thing that causes weathering is chemicals. So things like acid rain can cause chemical changes to the appearance of statues and other things, to buildings. So those are things that can cause weathering. And you need to be familiar with all of those things: gravity, flowing water, sand, ice, plants, and chemicals. So make sure you write that down. All right. Erosion. Erosion goes with weathering, but it's a little bit different. Erosion is the process of moving weathered rock from one place to another, often by wind or rain. It doesn't have to be weathered rock. It could be topsoil that gets picked up and blown away by wind. It could be a river flowing and cutting into a riverbank and moving some of that dirt and sediment along. So if something gets eroded, that means it gets moved away, taken away. But usually it's wind and water. There's not too many other forms of erosion or ways that erosion happens other than by wind and water. It can be very damaging. So here we have a gully here. There might have been a sudden rainstorm, but all this was flat land at one time, and the water has washed away all the dirt. And then here, this is probably sandstone. That structure was carved that way by the wind. Wind's blowing, it picks up sand. Sand hits the rock, and it slowly erodes away or takes pieces of the rock away as time goes on. Those are two good examples of it. All right. Can people do anything to prevent erosion? Sure, they can. Some of it has to do with farm crops. So around farmers' fields they plant trees because then the wind can't blow through the field and pick up the topsoil as easily. You can watch where you build so you don't build by areas that are easily erodible. So there's things like that we can do. All right, deposition is the dropping of weathered rock by wind or moving water. Erosion is the moving of that rock. Deposition is where it falls down. So this says deserts are landforms caused by deposition. So in large part, sand gets picked up and moved around. Sand dunes form this way. You go to the beach and you see the sand blowing into little hills. That's an example of erosion and deposition, where the sand finally drops down. So here we have deserts. You can see the sand dunes here, and over here we see an example of mountains and a river flowing through the mountains, and the water is carrying rocks and sediment from the mountains down into the mouth of the river, and you have a delta formed. If I can find it, I'm going to try to find a picture of the Yellow River, which flows through Shandong province where we live. It's one of China's most famous rivers, and since 1975 the delta that the river flows out into has changed and has grown significantly, adding more land to China, and all that comes from the mountains deeper in China, and it gets set down at the mouth of the river where it's shallower and the water is not moving as fast. So once again, you need to know what deposition is. Sediment are the small pieces of rock and soil and sand and silt that gets moved during deposition or during erosion. So sediment is what gets picked up and moved. So you need to know this as well. Know what sediment is. All right, how are landforms formed by weathering, erosion, and deposition? Well, sand dunes are moved by the direction of the wind. Sea arches are caused by wind and water erosion, and canyons are caused by water or ice erosion. So those are all ways that weathering, erosion, and deposition can form these different land features. Glaciers. Glaciers have had a huge effect on at least North America and Europe, as these large sheets of ice came down during the Ice Age, and you have hundreds of tons of ice on top of the Earth's surface, and it's slowly moving, and as it moves it picks up dirt, rock, sand, and basically just plows a path. So there's areas, at least in my home state, that are called the unglaciated areas, and they have plenty of hills and big rocks. But in the other parts where the glacier came through, you don't have as much of that because the glaciers plowed through and got rid of a lot of those hills and rocks and that sort of thing. So here we see a glacier coming down this mountain, and it's picking up rocks as it goes. It can pick up quite big rocks. And here's an example of where the ice gets in between this rock and it can split the rock in two. All right, that's about it. So the things that you're going to need to know are pretty much anything that was highlighted. So glaciers, how landforms were made, sediment, this is an important thing to know. Deposition, know what deposition is. Know what erosion is. Know, this is important, know what causes weathering. So make sure you have that written down. And then know what weathering is as well. So that's it for our slideshow today. Be sure you know what these terms mean. They're going to be important for you to know.